This is Audible.
Podium Audio presents The Bargain, Book 1 of Executive Suite Secrets, written by Jocelynn Drake, performed by Cale Williams. Chapter 1. Byron Graham. When I'd first begun working as the executive assistant to Sebastian Cortland at Cortland Enterprises, I'd thought my boss was a god, complete with a shining aura and inhuman good looks, full of benevolence and compassion. After a few months, I'd discovered he was more like Loki, a being filled with chaos and mischief, out to make my life a nightmare. 3 years later, he was still Loki. Stick close to me. Sebastian leaned in as we walked, his cologne dancing past my nose like a cool breeze. His warm, honey-brown eyes met mine, twinkling and bright with laughter, causing my heart to skip and my breath to catch. He whispered with an enormous grin, "My bodyguards are prepared to take us out of here by force. Just be ready to run the second I tell you to." And this was his response to the merger meeting we were marching into like a pair of avenging angels. It wasn't a joke. He was serious. Shit was about to hit the fan in a huge way, and the maniacal lunatic who signed my paychecks looked like a kid who'd been sent on a shopping spree in a toy store. For the past year, Cortland Enterprises and Bluepoint Industries had been in merger negotiations. The companies were roughly the same size, but Cortland Enterprises would have a slight majority after all the paperwork was complete. The one thing that had been slowing everything down was the due diligence conducted by Cortland Enterprises' massive team of forensic accountants, managers, and God only knew who else Sebastian had hired to dig through Bluepoint's books, hoping to uncover all their dirty secrets. Sebastian's father had started Cortland Enterprises, and there was no way in hell Sebastian was going to allow it to be dragged under by someone who had a past with shady dealings. Sebastian might act as though he were insane, but he knew when to be cautious. We arrived at Bluepoint's 35-floor headquarters, and 2 members of the executive team met us. Their smiles stiffened a bit at the sight of the 4 enormous men in suits who accompanied us, but no one said anything. They might have if they'd realized that Sebastian had another 2 waiting in the underground garage with his 2 town cars. After some excited chatter and glad-handing, they whisked us up to the top floor, which offered a near-panoramic view of downtown Cincinnati. It was a breathtaking symphony of glass, brushed nickel, and cold marble. As we walked, I caught peeks of Cortland Enterprises Tower just 5 blocks away. Ours was a beautiful glass and steel marvel with 40 floors, a shining crown for our city. But this was nice too. At the top floor, more executives greeted us. It wasn't until we reached the massive boardroom that we faced Chairman Oliver Danvers, CEO Wallace Barnes, and the board of directors. It had been a while since I'd seen such a group of wrinkly, saggy-faced white men. There was only one woman on the board, and the way the others seemed to talk over her and ignore her made me think she was nothing more than a token to trot out in the name of diversity, while never acknowledging her intelligence and experience. Now that Sebastian had reached his target, the light in his bright eyes appeared more manic and his grin even wider. The second he sat with a glass of iced water at the head of the table, I moved out of the firing zone to a set of seats placed along the far wall with 2 of his bodyguards. The other 2 were waiting at the elevators to protect our escape. Danvers stood with a broad, fatherly look. "I can't begin to tell you how happy I am to have you here with us on this momentous day, Sebastian. I've known your father..." Blah, blah, blah. Danvers's voice became a buzzing white noise under the grinding of my teeth. Pompous old egotistical asshole. I knew what was in the due diligence report. I'd helped the various departments compile it, listened as Sebastian had incredulously read parts of it out loud to me. Danvers wouldn't be waxing poetic about the old days for much longer. When the chairman of Bluepoint Industries was done, Barnes stood up and gave a similar speech about how this was going to create bigger and better opportunities for the combined company and how the employees were going to benefit. This was all overlooking the fact that the CEO's proposal included laying off 15% of his own workforce to trim the fat. Wouldn't his newly unemployed workers love to know they were regarded as mere fat? The entire time, I kept my head lowered as I typed on my phone. I sent messages to his bodyguards in the garage, keeping them updated on where we were in the meeting. There were also texts to Kalen, who was technically my assistant, keeping him updated on what was happening. And, of course, there was the usual barrage of emails and reports that needed to be dealt with. Being away from my desk did not mean the chaos stopped for 1 second. "Thank you so much for your warm and enthusiastic welcome," Sebastian said, pulling my attention away from my phone. I finished out my last text and tucked my phone into the interior pocket of my suit jacket. When the idea of the Cortland Enterprises and Blue Point Industries merger was first floated to me, I was skeptical. We've been in competition across several fields for a couple of decades. Sometimes we came out on top, sometimes you did. But I saw the synergy that would result if we became one company, the efficiency we could achieve, the lowered costs that could be passed along to our loyal customers. It was all brilliant. I lifted my gaze to the boardroom table and watched as Sebastian smoothly pushed out of his seat to stand. Sebastian was a pacer, particularly as he talked. The man had to be moving constantly. It was his only way of burning off the endless amounts of energy he possessed. I bit the inside of my cheek as I watched him grow more animated about the merger while he threw out all the business buzzwords he hated. He stopped behind the chairman's seat, his hand resting on the back as he released an extravagant sigh. "But we had to conduct our due diligence for the safety of all our people." Formality, Barnes said, waving a hand as if Sebastian shouldn't worry about insulting him with such silly nonsense. "Both companies had to run their checks." "Yes, and I apologize for us taking so many months. It was my fault. I needed to be sure that all T's were crossed and the I's dotted." That was my cue. I stood up, straightened my jacket, and walked to the box one bodyguard had carried into the building for me. Within it were 2 large stacks of 200-page binders. I grabbed as many as I could comfortably carry and began handing them out to the people seated around the table. "My findings should not come as a shock to most of you. The surprise is likely that we found what your people tried so hard to hide." Sebastian paused and flashed them a grin that would have befitted a great white shark. It was all I could do to maintain my stone-faced expression. A heady mix of fear and excitement was bubbling through my veins. He was going to drop the hammer, turn them into dust. "In our 6 months of research, we found evidence of rampant embezzlement, fraud, trade violations, dangerous working conditions, and employee harassment. Your books are so cooked they're extra crispy. Not even the Colonel would touch your books. If Enron and WorldCom had a baby, Blue Point would be that embezzle baby." Barnes launched to his feet, his entire body shaking as his face turned so red he looked as if he were about to explode. "How dare you! How dare you!" Sebastian shouted back. "Not only did you spearhead this illegal behavior, but the point of this merger was to bury all your secrets within Cortland Enterprises while you walked away with your oversized payoff and the marketing manager you've been sleeping with." Sebastian lowered his voice to a fake whisper. "By the way, I forwarded the spicy video we came across of you and her trapped in the elevator to your wife's private investigator." Barnes fell into an apoplectic fit, hissing and gasping, his face looking more purple by the second. But it wasn't just him. Everyone at the table was turning new and interesting shades of color, ranging from very pale to ghastly green to eye-popping red. I stepped away when I finished handing out the binders detailing all the information we'd uncovered. A firm hand grabbed my elbow, and I glanced up to find Neil, one of Sebastian's part-time bodyguards, pulling me a little farther from the table and closer to our exit. The entire time his gaze never wavered from Sebastian, who had resumed his pacing. Unfortunately, the lunatic was on the far side of the room, the giant wooden board table between him and the bodyguard. Thankfully, he kept moving as he spoke, leaving the board of directors to flip frantically through the binders with horrified expressions. Oliver Danvers, Wallace Barnes, and probably other executives before you spent decades creating this house of cards, creating lie after lie to hide your shady dealings. As you reached a point where it was on the verge of toppling, you decided to sweep all your dirt under the rug, and the rug you chose was Cortland Enterprises. At last, Sebastian worked his way around the table so that he was within feet of his bodyguards, and I could breathe again. Now we just had to get Loki Jr. out of the building. Sebastian grinned and clapped his hands together. The sound was like a shot above the gasping and seething. To show my appreciation for choosing Cortland Enterprises as the company you wanted to turn into a dumpster fire, I have shared all the information that I've uncovered with the SEC, IRS, FTC, and the Federal Department of Labor. I'm sure you'll be hearing from all of them shortly. There was a heartbeat of pristine silence. No one moved. Only the wind as it howled past the windows as it rose off the river. And then the room exploded into outraged shouts, fervent denials, and even a couple of people desperately trying to strike bargains. It was too late for all that. I'd been there as Sebastian had made some of those phone calls. When he'd handed over that information, he'd made one request. Let him drop the news on them prior to any of the agencies moving in. If there was any justice in the world, representatives from the IRS and SEC would be entering the lobby as we left. Go, Neil snapped, giving me a push toward the double doors. I wanted to drag my feet and make sure Sebastian was right behind me, but I couldn't be a distraction today. Neil needed to have his full attention on Sebastian, to concern himself with his boss's safety. However, I took only 2 steps, and there was a light touch on my shoulder. I glanced to my left to find Sebastian walking beside me, a broad smile on his lips and a twinkle in his eyes. His hand was a warm weight, guiding me forward while also reassuring me that he was right by my side. You okay? He asked, as if I freaking mattered in the middle of this insanity. I'm fine, thank you. We should get going, sir. It was a struggle to keep the incredulous horror out of my voice and maintain a professional tone, but I managed it. Flanked by bodyguards Neil and Carl, we dashed to the elevators as hell continued to break out behind us. There were shouts for security, the police, lawyers, and more. Phones were ringing madly, and the few assistants and management who lingered on the top floor all looked lost and terrified. My heart went out to them. They'd started the day thinking that they were a step away from a new future with Cortland Enterprises. But tonight, they were all going to be updating their resumes while chugging their beers. Do you think that was over the top? Too much? It was too much, wasn't it? Sebastian inquired, his grin brighter than the sun glinting off the silver elevator doors. It was over the top, so incredibly, ridiculously over the top. Did you enjoy yourself? I inquired in return. Carl jogged ahead of us and held open the final glass door that would take us to the elevators. Even with that door wide open, I still had to grab Sebastian's arm and pull him toward me to keep him from walking into the clear glass wall. God help me, the man was a magnet for those walls. I felt like I spent a quarter of my time keeping him from smashing into them every time we visited a place that used them. Sebastian sighed, not even blinking at the fact that I'd physically moved him out of harm's way. I did. I really did. It wasn't over the top, sir. When we reached the elevator without further incident, Sebastian leaned against the back wall and flashed me a smirk, as if the man knew what I was thinking. He closed his eyes, and some of the joy drained from his face. It was over the top, but they deserved it for all the people they hurt and lied to, because they planned to destroy Cortland Enterprises to hide their evil. Yep, no regrets. Silence fell over the elevators as we rode it to the garage. We were ushered into the sleek black town car with plush leather seats. God, I loved this car. I loved every second I got to ride in it with Sebastian. It was the most comfortable thing I'd ever sat in. Then it moved, and I was floating on a cloud. But enough nonsense. We were safely on the road, away from the Blue Point Industries disaster, with our integrity intact, but Cortland Enterprises was in danger. We're screwed, Sebastian mumbled beside me. He leaned his left elbow on the door and rested his head on his hand while stretching his long legs out in front of him. I had reached for my phone to check for any small fires that might have developed while I'd been escaping with my boss, but I returned it to my pocket. Sebastian looked at me and gave me a half smile. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. It's not fair of me to put that weight on your shoulders. Sir, I see many of the same reports you do. I've sat in on your meetings with the CFO. You wouldn't have hired me if I wasn't smart enough to see that we're losing money. True. But I'm supposed to be upbeat and positive. You are, but I appreciate that as a leader, you're also realistic. No one would want to run to the helm after the Titanic has hit the iceberg to hear the captain say, "It's fine, everything is fine." A surprised bark of laughter jumped from Sebastian's throat, and I dutifully ignored how the sound warmed my heart. Hell, Byron, I don't know what I'd do without you. I don't think we're the Titanic yet, but you can't abandon me. Not for a while, at least. Cortland Enterprises is not the Titanic, and I have zero plans to leave the company, period. Sebastian's smile returned, and I didn't want to think about how powerful it made me feel. It was as though I'd ascended to the heavens and shoved aside those clouds so his light could shine through. What I did for him might not seem like much. Most people would have thought that I just balanced his calendar, fetched his coffee, and made sure he had all the papers he needed for each meeting. But it was more than that. I was a sounding board, a safe place for him to vent, and the person who kept him focused. He was the captain, and I was his navigator searching for the smoothest course through choppy waters. The ride to the office was a short one. Normally, the extra bodyguards would have been released for the day, but after the splash Sebastian and I had made at Blue Point, I asked them to stay at the office to keep their eyes out for trouble. I didn't expect any of the executives or directors of Blue Point to make physical threats, but it was always better to be safe than sorry. On the way up to Sebastian's office, we made 4 detours through different departments. Sebastian believed in showing his face to all the workers so that he felt more approachable. As a result, he got to sign a birthday card, sing happy birthday, and eat cake while he directed me to find 2 appropriate baby shower gifts and send flowers to the wife of janitor Patrick for her post-foot surgery recovery. I also helped him dodge 2 more walls. That helped, Sebastian announced as he strolled into his palatial office with me on his heels. I took his suit jacket and hung it in his closet while he rolled up his sleeves. I am ready to get back to business. That merger was supposed to cut our supply chain costs. If things don't improve from their current levels, we're looking at layoffs by Christmas. Which I knew was the very last thing he wanted. Byron, how about an old-fashioned after-hours brainstorming session? We need one big new product to get us over the worst of the slump. As I turned toward his desk, he dropped into his swivel seat and spun to face me, his hands behind his head. I pulled out my phone and opened a blank page for notes. Of course, sir. Who would you like me to invite? No. He waved his hands. I was thinking just the 2 of us. We can bring in others at a later date. Too many people in the early planning stage make it too noisy. I can't think. My head is most clear when it's only you. I would not blush. He said crazy things like this all the time and didn't mean a damn thing by it. We'll order in some dinner. We haven't tried that new Korean restaurant that opened up in OTR, and I know how much you love bibimbap. I could go for some bulgogi. Good food, quiet atmosphere. We'll get this all worked out. If only it could be so easy. I opened my mouth to agree, but a call appeared on my screen that stopped my heart. Sheriff Dan Wheaton. This was never good. What's wrong? Sebastian's sharp question snapped my head up, and for a second I was tongue-tied. I wasn't sure how to explain that it was likely that my mother had been arrested again or found dead. Those things didn't seem good to drop on your boss's head. Personal call. I stumbled and stammered as if I'd forgotten the English language. Oh, don't worry about it. Take the call, and we'll make plans later this afternoon. Thank you, I mumbled as I nearly ran out of his office. I answered my phone, slipping into a nook where no one could overhear me. Hey, Brian, the sheriff drawled in a thick accent, making my eye twitch. The man could not remember that my name was Byron, not Brian. I'd think he did it on purpose if I didn't hear him regularly call his coworkers and other people by the wrong name. The only thing that saved me from losing my shit with this man was his compassion and patience. How bad is it? I sighed.
Well, I got her locked up in the drunk tank. She was arguing with the neighbors about them letting their dog crap in her yard.
I rolled my eyes. Why she even cared was beyond me. Her yard was barely larger than a postage stamp and filled with dirt and crabgrass. She never went outside. I'm guessing she was swearing loud enough to disturb all the neighbors.
Yeah, that, and she dropped trow and took a shit in the neighbor's yard.
I lowered my phone, took 2 steps, spun, and walked back to where I'd been standing while clenching my fist hard enough to make the protective plastic case creak. Why? Why did she have to make my life a living hell? Why would she do this? How much? I bit out when I could unclench my jaw enough to speak. The sheriff huffed a breathless laugh.
Well, I talked her neighbors into cutting a deal. They picked up the poop in her yard, and she picked up her own poop before I hauled her to jail to sleep it off. She's been with me for a couple of hours. I need you to come pick her up.
Yeah, okay. I'll be there in about an hour. Maybe sooner. No bibimbap for me tonight. Chapter 2. Byron Graham.
Sharon Rogers is a cunt.
This was one of my mother's favorite complaints. Mary Graham hated her neighbors. She'd hated them the day they'd moved in 10 years ago, and she'd hated them every day since. I wasn't even sure of the reason anymore. I thought she didn't like their dog, who'd passed away more than 5 years ago. Not her doing. The dog was old, and I'd sent them a condolence fruit basket. Of course, she'd found out and had hated me for about 4 months, and then forgotten about it. She'd never stopped hating the Rogerses, and that hatred had taken on a new ferocity when Sharon had replaced her old dog with 2 yappy puppies. As I drove her home from the jail, she went on rambling, a mostly incoherent tirade about neighbors, police, and ungrateful children who didn't take proper care of their elders. Most of it went in one ear and out the other. I'd heard all her tirades before. They were part of her coming down from being drunk. She was going through withdrawal and hurting. I tried to have sympathy, but I was sorry to say that a lot of my sympathy had dried up from years of episodes like this. Alcoholism was an ugly disease. I pulled my beat-up 15-year-old Toyota into her driveway and sighed. Everything seemed as it was the last time I'd been here 4 days ago. The tiny salt box house with 2 bedrooms and a single bathroom was built in the 50s, and it didn't look like much had changed with it since then. Old, dingy white paint was fading and chipping thanks to age and weather. The windows were filthy and perpetually covered with heavy curtains to keep out the sun. A scattering of weeds grew in the yard and poked up between the cracks in the sidewalk. After I slipped out of the car, I walked to the passenger side to help her. As soon as I got her to her feet, she slapped my hands and pushed me away, claiming she could do it herself, except she struggled to do it on her own. I walked behind her, my hands extended to catch her if she fell. My mom was 52, but she looked and moved as though she were in her 70s. Life had not been kind to her, and she'd chosen to deal with it the only way she knew how, with booze. We stepped into the living room, and the smell of alcohol assaulted my nose. How did she manage it? I'd been here 4 days ago, and I'd cleaned out her stash. All the local stores knew they weren't allowed to sell to her. She'd lost her license and sold her car years ago. How was she getting it? Forcing my gaze away from the empty bottles of hard liquor and beer on the table, I called out, "Mom, how about I make you something to eat before you lie down? You've got to be hungry and tired." She grunted as she shuffled to the kitchen. "Ain't nothing to eat." I bit my tongue as I followed her. That couldn't be right. I'd dropped off more than a week's worth of food not that long ago. She couldn't have gone through all of it. But as I pulled open the fridge, I found a bottle of vodka, eggs, and a bag of salad that was at the end of its lifespan. I snagged the bottle of vodka and marched to the sink, where I poured out its contents to the sound of her shouts and calling me every name under the sun. When she ran out of steam, she stomped off to the bathroom and slammed the door. I used the opportunity to ransack her room, where I found 2 unopened bottles under the bed and 3 opened bottles hidden in her closet. By the time she left the bathroom and stomped to her bedroom, where she slammed the door yet again, I was pouring the last of the booze down the sink. For a moment, the weight of it all threatened to crush me. The endlessness of this endeavor. I'd find the bottles and empty them. I'd talk to all the nearby liquor vendors and tell them not to sell to her. She was on a strict budget. She didn't drive. After hours of searching and cleaning, I'd leave the house empty of booze and refilled with food. She would go a few days, maybe a few weeks, without alcohol, and then we'd be right back here. I'd tried getting her help, but she would give up too quickly, or refuse the help completely. What she needed was to be put in some kind of assisted living, or even have a nurse checking on her, but I couldn't afford either option, so I was left with no choice but to make regular trips to check on her and dump out her booze. Fuck this. Enough of the pity party. I shoved away from the sink, took off my suit jacket, and hung it on one of the kitchen chairs. After rolling up my sleeves, I submitted an Instacart order for some groceries to be delivered, and I set about cleaning her house. Carpets were vacuumed, surfaces were dusted, and floors were scrubbed. I opened the windows to let in a cool spring breeze, hoping to push out some of the sour despair that clung to the house like black mold. A peek into her bedroom revealed her asleep on the bed. I gathered up the clothes I could find, tossed about the room, and threw them into the wash. By the time I was moving them to the dryer, a delivery person had dropped the food on the front porch. I prepared a few meals that she needed only to heat in the microwave and wrote out some instructions for them. It was after 5 when I was done, and she hadn't stirred. I peeked into her room to make sure she was still breathing. It wouldn't have been a surprise if she were pretending to sleep so she wouldn't have to deal with me. As I walked to my car, my phone vibrated, and I almost cried at the name on the screen. "Hello, Dr. Willard," I said, trying so hard not to clench my teeth as I leaned on the driver's side door. The quiet neighborhood had grown a little busier as people rushed home at the end of a long day. Overhead, the sky was a bright blue, and the late spring leaves rustled in the mild wind, but the happy May day did nothing to remove the growing knot in my stomach. "Hello, Byron. How have you been?" "Shit, Dr. Willard. It's been a shit day, and I know you're calling to make it worse." But I didn't say that, no matter how badly I wanted to, because I knew he didn't care. He wasn't my doctor, and I wasn't his problem. Ronald Graham Jr. was. "I'm fine. How are you?" "Not too bad. I'm sorry to bother you today, but I'm calling to let you know we need to increase Ronnie's meds again. He had another violent episode with one of the orderlies." My muscles tensed, and a chill swept across my skin. Shit. Was anyone hurt? No, just a chair. No people. I sagged, my head falling back to rest on the roof. Thank God. "He's sedated now. I'm going to make some changes that should help him stay calmer and keep him from getting agitated." "Thank you." "Byron, I know I don't need to remind you that this isn't the best situation for Ronnie. The facilities at the Holy Mother Hospital aren't equipped to handle all Ronnie's needs. I think you need to consider moving him to another facility that has more programs and can be more hands-on with their care of him." The lump in my throat was making it impossible to swallow, but it was the only way I could squeeze out a few words. "I know, Dr. Willard. I appreciate you taking the time to call me." There was nothing to say after that. I knew Ronnie needed to be moved to another hospital that could help him, but the other option was nearly double the cost of his current location, and I'd yet to find a way to pay for it. Between paying to support Mom and Ronnie, there was nothing left of my paycheck at the end of the day. I needed more money, and there was none to be had. With a grunt, I shoved off the car and climbed inside. I couldn't stay in this downward spiral of frustration and hopelessness. It would leave me curled up in the fetal position in the corner somewhere, and that wouldn't solve a damn one of my problems. The one thing that made sense was going back to work. At least there, I could be useful. And if I were lucky, Sebastian would still be working. His smile could help me forget how shitty my life away from the office really was. Chapter 3. Sebastian Cortland. How did you end up here, drinking with us? Pierce's voice was evil and sly, dragging a groan out of me while Rome cackled like a fucking hyena. To hell with you both. It's been a hard day. I sank lower in my chair and glared at two of my oldest friends as they snickered at me from the sofa in my lounge. The assholes had come to my house, intent on annoying me, and I'd made the mistake of allowing them to stay. I'd met Pierce Sutton and Rome Ashbridge while away at college. Because I was the craftier manipulator, I'd convinced them to move to Cincinnati with me after we'd graduated. The only one missing from our usual quartet was Declan. We went all the way back to high school, and he now worked as CFO for Cortland Enterprises. Pierce's thin mouth twisted into a smirk as he stared into the amber whiskey in his crystal tumbler. Rome got it out of your bodyguard Carl that you were in fine form today at Blue Point Industries. That should have put you in a good mood. I opened my mouth, but Rome was faster. Except he had this romantic dinner for two planned with his assistant. Rome sat up, placed his fingers to his lips, and faked looking around the room. But where is he? He didn't turn you down again, did he? Asshole. You're both assholes and jackals. I'm sitting here with my heart in shreds, and you're laughing at my misery. Naturally, my pity party earned me even more laughter, to the point of Rome falling into Pierce and nearly sloshing his drink out of his glass. Pierce snorted and shoved Rome off him. Really, Cor? How long have you been pining for this guy? Pierce mocked. Well, he's worked for me for 3 years, so I'd say 3 years, I said while flipping him off. It was sad. I was pathetic and hopeless. Byron Graham was adorable and perfect in every freaking way. From how he styled his dark brown hair so that it had a perfect part in this little swoop, to the way his suits exquisitely hugged his narrow frame, to the way his lips twitched when he was trying so damn hard to hold in whatever inappropriate thing he wanted to say in response to my idiocy. The first time I saw him had been like getting hit by a semi. For several critical seconds, I hadn't been able to remember my own name. I hadn't even been able to breathe. Thankfully, Janice from HR had been there to maneuver the bulk of the interview. But just to add another incredible layer of ganache to his perfect pastry, Byron was also the most competent, brilliant, efficient assistant I'd ever had in my life. It was as though he could see into my mind and anticipate all the things I needed. He could read a room like no one else and say or do the perfect thing every damn time. It was so fucking sexy. That was exactly what made him off limits. He was the perfect assistant, and I couldn't afford to lose him. So I'd learned to make do with sneaking smiles out of him, long lunches where we talked business, and the occasional after-hours meeting where we ordered dinner in and Byron loosened his tie enough to unbutton the top button of his shirt. I was pathetic. There was no way past it. I was fantasizing about my assistant, and the vultures I called friends were carving up the remains of my heart for laughs. What the hell was I supposed to do? I don't understand why you torture yourself like this. Just change the employee handbook and get rid of that stupid rule stating managers can't date their direct reports, Rome stated, before throwing back the last of his whiskey with a clink of ice in his glass. I rolled my eyes and did the same. The burn was exquisite and helped to push away the chill surrounding my heart. Because that rule is there to protect my employees. How shitty would it look if I got rid of that rule and then asked Byron out? If I have some unscrupulous managers in my company, they'd pounce on their team members and think they had my approval. Well, Pierce said so slowly, you could sneak around with them. I shoved out of my chair and grabbed Rome's empty glass on my way to the wet bar for a refill. Since I couldn't have a work meeting with Byron, I'd summoned over my friends for a night on the town. We were waiting for Declan to leave the office and meet up with us for a late dinner. Enough about Byron and my sad love life, I grumbled, because I was afraid of letting it slip how many times I'd considered Pierce's suggestion. Work was exhausting enough without rehashing it. I paused for a second, racking my brain for something else as I splashed more whiskey in our glasses. "Oh, I heard from Simon today." "Simon? Simon who?" Pierce inquired. "Holy shit, Sawyer's little brother?" Rome gasped as I handed him his glass. "Yep." Rome chuckled and shook his head. "I haven't thought about that squirt in years. What's he up to?" "That squirt just finished grad school, old man," I said, relishing any chance to make Rome wake up to his own aging body. He wasn't 20 anymore. Hell, he wasn't even 30. "Fuck." "What did he want?" Pierce demanded, his tone sharper than I would have expected. "He's moving to the area for a job and he wanted to meet up with us." "Why?" Pierce's stubbornness and shit attitude left me wanting to chuck an ice cube at his head. Thankfully, Rome was sitting right next to him and could punch him in the shoulder for me. "Because we were best friends with his big brother," Rome snapped, while Pierce scowled. "We were all close with Sawyer, and I think he'd appreciate it if we looked out for his baby brother," I said, which got that glare directed at me. Whatever. It's not like we have to chauffeur him to Little League and attend his recitals. He's a fucking adult with a master's degree. I think we need to invite him out for dinner. Answer any questions he might have about living here. A non-committal grunt left Pierce, and I let it go. Pierce had always taken Sawyer's death the hardest. Sawyer had been the 5th member of our crew in college, but he died in a swimming accident prior to graduation. We'd met his brother Simon when he and his parents had come for a visit. It had taken all of 2 seconds to see that Simon idolized his older brother and did everything he could to emulate him. Thankfully, Sawyer had doted on Simon as well, rather than being an asshole toward him, as teenagers were prone to do. God knew I hadn't treated my younger sister the best while we were growing up. However, in my defense, Aggie had been and always would be a pain in my ass. "When's he get into town?" Rome asked. He didn't give me a specific date, just sometime this summer. I told him to reach out to me as soon as he gets settled. We can arrange dinner or something. Fine. I think we need to get back to this issue you're having with your executive assistant," Pierce countered in a brisk tone that left me sighing and Rome cackling maniacally. "There's no need to tread that ground again," I grumbled. "I'm attracted to Byron, but I don't see any way around it." "Except for sneaking," Pierce pointed out. "And I'd be fine with that to start, to see if we're a good match." I was confident in my heart, though, that he was the perfect match for me. But we'd have to figure out something long-term so he didn't get hurt. With another groan, I waved my empty hand at those assholes because they'd sent my brain down that dead-end road. All of this is useless talk. He would never go for it. Let's put aside the fact that he's not attracted to me. The man is straight as an arrow. "He's straight?" Rome choked out. "I thought you said he was gay." "Straight as an arrow, meaning he's not the type to break the rules," I bit out. "While he's never said the words, he has given me enough clues over the years to make me confident that he is gay." "But he's never actually said it?" Pierce asked. I was going to kill them both. That was not what I'd been looking for in a relaxing evening after a somewhat shit day. Luck shone in my favor as my phone vibrated with a call from Declan. I put my glass of untouched whiskey on the table and rose to my feet as I answered the phone. "Hey, Declan, what's taking so long? You getting out of there? Your boss is a real asshole." Declan grunted. I wasn't sure if he was agreeing with me or acknowledging my shitty joke. His grunts were much easier to read when I could see his face. "I finished compiling those new numbers you wanted. As I was leaving the report on your desk, I found your assistant passed out in your office." "What?" The single word leaped out of my mouth in a shout that I couldn't stop. My heart tried to crawl into my throat, and my knees turned to water. "What happened? Is he hurt? Have you called an ambulance? Does it look like someone attacked him?" As I fired questions at him, Pierce and Rome rose to their feet as if they were preparing to jump into battle with me. "You misunderstand," Declan replied with his usual measured tone and patience. Nothing ruffled Declan's feathers. "He is unconscious, seated at your board table, surrounded by papers and a bottle of your scotch. It appears he came in here to do some work and drank enough to pass out. He doesn't appear harmed at all, just sleeping off his alcohol." My relief dropped me back into my seat, my head resting in my empty hand. "You're going to kill me one of these days, Deck," I muttered. "It wasn't my intention to scare you. I thought you should know since this seemed out of character for your assistant.
Yes, he has my permission to use my office after hours, and I've invited him more than once to have a drink, so long as he promised me he wouldn't drive intoxicated. But getting drunk isn't his style. Something bad must have happened after he'd left the office to deal with that personal matter. Do me a favor, stay there. Don't wake him up. Keep an eye on him to make sure he doesn't try to drive home. I'll be there in less than an hour. After I relieve you, you can head out to dinner with Pearson Rome. As you wish. Declan hung up, but I was used to his brevity. When I pocketed my phone, I found Pearson Rome staring at me in shock. Your unflappable assistant is drunk in the office? Rome asked. In your office? Pierce added. Yes, and you both need to forget you ever heard about that. Something is wrong. This is not like Byron, and he needs my help. You two assholes go meet Declan for dinner. I have other plans. I needed to get to Byron. My always perfect, stalwart, brilliant assistant was, as Declan had described him, passed out, seated at the long, shiny table off to one side of my office. The lights were turned low around most of the room. There was a glow over the table that glinted and danced along the crystal decanter and empty glass on Byron's right. The decanter was only half empty, and I'd had a good bit out of it prior to Byron taking some. Either Byron had been drinking before he'd made it to the office, or he was a cheap date. As soon as I spotted Byron, I got rid of Declan, sending him off to dinner with our friends. I stood beside Byron's sleeping form, my eyes skimming the scattered papers in front of him. There were reports from all the different departments and subsidiary businesses. There was also a legal pad filled with his notes, but the farther I traveled down the page, the less legible they grew. After whatever shit thing he'd gone through, he'd returned to work on Cortland Enterprises' problem of falling revenue. My heart simultaneously swelled and broke for him. If there was anyone in desperate need of a break, it was my poor assistant. With Byron sleeping so soundly, I gave in to one of my greatest wishes. I reached out and lightly touched his hair, letting those fine, silken threads brush along my fingertips. I shouldn't. It was wrong. But if I couldn't ever date him, I wanted to look back and have this tiny thing. I rested my hand on his shoulder and shook him gently. Byron, it's time to wake up. I'll take you home, I said in a low voice. The young man jolted upright, a piece of paper stuck to his cheek. I swallowed the chuckle that rose and plucked away the paper. The movement drew his gaze up to me as he seemed to have taken zero notice of the fact that I was still holding his shoulder. I'd expected horror when he saw me. What I got was the widest grin I'd ever seen on Byron's face. Sebastian, he slurred. What are you doing here? Oh no, is it Monday already? This time I laughed, ignoring the flutter in my chest at the sound of him saying my name for the first time. Well, almost saying it. No, it's Friday night. I came to take you home. It's not good to sleep here. Oh, then I gotta clean up my mess. He turned away from me and stretched his arms across the table, dragging the papers noisily to his body. I jumped forward and snagged the decanter and glass as they moved with the papers, and I deposited them on the hidden wet bar. We can leave the papers to deal with on Monday. They'll be fine, I reassured him as I returned to his side. Okay. It was the most affable tone I'd ever heard from him. He pushed to his feet and flopped into the chair again as if his legs refused to hold him. Byron directed a quizzical look at his legs, swaying in his seat as if he were also confused by what happened. When he made another attempt, I grabbed his arm and held him upright, stopping him from falling a second time. As we made our way to the elevators, I wrapped an arm around him while Byron mimicked me, putting his arm behind my waist while he laid his head on my chest. You're tall, Byron declared with a lopsided grin. He wasn't wrong. I had a solid 6 inches on him, and I appreciated that I had a considerable height and weight advantage over him since he couldn't walk straight. And you are the happiest drunk I've ever met. Byron smiled, his eyes already drooping. I suspected he'd be asleep like a drowsy toddler within minutes of starting our journey. We made it to the garage,
where my bodyguard Carl jumped out to help me maneuver the noodle-legged Byron into the back seat. "Where to, sir?" Carl inquired before I could follow Byron inside. I frowned at Byron, who was slumped very low in the seat. It was unlikely Carl knew his address, and I wasn't all that thrilled with the idea of leaving him home alone like this. "Take me home. He can sleep in one of the guest rooms." I put my foot in the car and stopped, turning to Carl. "I'm going to tell him I picked him up alone. You were never here." "Of course, sir." Carl agreed, with a nod and a completely blank expression. When Byron sobered up, he'd be embarrassed as hell. Right now, I was hoping to convince him I was the only one who'd see him like this. He didn't need to know about Carl and Declan. That would add to his misery. I slipped into the car and scooted closer to Byron than I normally would, so I could help him sit up. He was one hard stop away from being on the floor. "I love this car," Byron moaned as he rested his head on my shoulder. "This is the very best car." "Really? I didn't know you were so fond of it." This was killing me. Everything out of his mouth was too adorable. I'd had no idea he was this cute. I found him excruciatingly adorable sober, but it was a different kind of adorable. It was like dressing a bunny rabbit in a suit adorable. Drunk Byron was simply the bunny. "The seats are so soft and comfy," Byron continued. He ran his left hand along the side of his seat. He turned his face up to me and smiled. "The car also smells like you." "It smells like me?" That was not what I'd expected him to say. Byron nodded, still giving me that charming, crooked smile. "Couple times you had Carl drive me to run errands. I sat here and the car still smelled like your cologne. It's nice." A big red warning light flashed in my head, but I smacked that shit as if I were shutting off my morning alarm. I shifted so I was facing him better and bent my head. "You like how I smell?" "So much," Byron agreed. He dropped his voice to a whisper. "You smell so good, and you're so sexy." Just as my heart skipped at his declaration, a laugh burst out of Byron that ended in a snort. He slapped me on the chest. "But you know you're sexy." "The only thing that matters to me is if you think I'm sexy." Oh, I was a bad man. Such a bad, bad man. But I'd been pining and longing for the tiniest hint that he thought of me as more than his boss. I couldn't let this go. Byron's smile softened, and he raised his left hand to cradle my cheek. My pulse soared through the room, but I sat frozen, my eyes locked with his sleepy ones. "Yes, I think you're very sexy." He pulled me forward with the slightest pressure, and I went so damn willingly. Our lips brushed lightly at first, a feather-light touch followed by his hot breath dancing across my damp mouth. I went in for a second kiss, loving the happy grunt that left him, the way his fingers slid to the nape of my neck. The kiss was hot and tender, so perfect. But as quickly as it had started, that hand on my neck went limp and he stopped moving completely. I lifted my head to find Byron's head resting against the seat, his eyes closed and his lips slack. A soft snore rose from him. Fuck. He'd passed out. Chapter 4. Byron Graham. Oh God, let me die. My body ached, and my mouth tasted like envelope paste. My head hurt, but not as bad as I was expecting, which meant I could feel my stomach attempting to eat itself. Why, in all that was holy, had I drunk so much on an empty stomach? You would think that after dealing with an alcoholic mother, I wouldn't want to touch a drop of alcohol, but I'd reached the end of my rope. I'd needed something to get through the next second, and concentrating on work hadn't been enough. There had been only 3 options I could think of: drugs, sex, and alcohol. Drugs were never a choice. I wasn't the one-night stand type. So that left me with booze, and Sebastian had far too much of it at my fingertips in his office. I'd had only 2 glasses to calm my nerves and soothe the whirlpool in my head. I was just like my damn mother. Fuck. I must have left an enormous mess in his office. But how did I get home? My eyes popped open, and even in the dim light sneaking in around the curtains, I could see that I was not in my apartment. This room looked as if it were double the size of my shoebox studio apartment. With a strangled cry, I shoved into a sitting position, threw off the covers, and turned on the bedside lamp. Soft light caressed buttery, warm walls, elegant pale wood furniture, and dark, heavy curtains that were pulled across at least 3 windows to block out the light. This room was completely foreign to me. It was almost like a hotel room, but this was all too nice to be a hotel. I was in someone's house. My fingers twisted in my hair, and I squeezed my eyes shut as I racked my brain for what had happened last night. How had I gotten here? I refused to believe that I'd stumbled out of the office and down the street to some nightclub or bar where my super-rich hookup had brought me home and taken care of me. It wasn't like Cincinnati was dripping with ultra-rich guardian angels searching for idiots to save from themselves. The only rich person I knew even a little was... Oh, fuck. The fog covering my memories parted enough to spit out a hazy memory of Sebastian standing over me in his office, smiling. There was another of me plastered to the side of him while we were in the elevators, and then kissing him. No, I gasped, slapping my hand to my mouth as my stomach twisted. That had to be a dream. I couldn't have really kissed him. It was bad enough that I'd been discovered drunk on his alcohol in his office, but to have kissed him? I was dead. Just stick a fork in me and sprinkle me with garnish because I was fucking done. There was no coming back from this. I would need to move far away, change my name, maybe even get a facelift so no one could ever recognize me. But first, I had to get out of here before anyone noticed. My gaze dropped to my chest to find that I was wearing strange pajamas. They were pale blue with a darker blue piping, certainly the softest things I'd ever worn in my life. But why the hell was I in someone else's pajamas? Where were my clothes and my phone? There was no clean escape without my phone to call for a ride. A soft knock on the door tore me from my current panic attack to send me on a different spiraling panic attack. Yes, I squeaked. The door opened, and a man in a dapper gray suit with salt and pepper hair entered, carrying a tray. I recognized the man in an instant. It was Wilkins, Sebastian's butler. He'd pop into the office to deliver things like suits and other items to Sebastian when he had to go from the office to some party or event. I was definitely in Sebastian's house. "Good morning, Mr. Graham. I hope you had a pleasant rest," he said as he entered the room. God love the man, he'd managed to say all that without letting even a hint of judginess enter his tone. I swallowed hard, twice, to get my throat to let a few words out. "Yes, thank you." "I've brought you some breakfast. Nothing too heavy, sir. Master Sebastian warned me you might still be feeling under the weather." My growing horror warred with 2 little warm spots forming in my chest. One was for Sebastian's thoughtfulness, and the other was for how Wilkins called his boss Master Sebastian. He'd mentioned once that Wilkins had first come to work for Sebastian's parents, but he'd followed Sebastian when he'd set up his own house after college because he was concerned with Sebastian's ability to care for himself properly. "Is Mr. Cortland awake?" I asked, still clinging to the hope that I'd be able to sneak out of the house before I had to face him. "Awake and ready to start the day," Sebastian announced as he walked through the door. Fuck my life. Wilkins finished setting up my breakfast tray on the small table with 2 chairs and darted to open the curtains to the windows, revealing a stunning view of a glittering lake surrounded by trees. It was like a fairy tale. Without another word, Wilkins offered me and Sebastian a tiny bow of his head and left the room, closing the door behind him. I was alone with Sebastian in what was likely a guest bedroom, wearing strange pajamas after getting drunk in his office. There was no way to salvage this. Sir, I stammered, are you feeling better? Do you need anything for your head or your stomach? I shook my head. All the earlier aches and pains had vaporized the moment I'd realized the true state of things. Now, all I could feel was cold, clammy dread that left me clinging to the warm blankets still draped over my lap. Fuck. I was talking to my boss while I was in bed. I jumped to my feet and shoved my fingers through my hair, trying to tame what I knew to be the world's worst bedhead. Sir, about yesterday. I know there's no way you can forgive my deplorable behavior. Are you hungry? Sebastian interrupted. He motioned to the table and the spread of food. The plate was even under a cliched silver dome cover to keep the heat from escaping. Carol makes the best breakfast. Her eggs are the fluffiest. She's the reason I never eat breakfast outside of the house. My traitorous stomach growled, even as it roiled with nausea and panic, and Sebastian's smile widened in triumph, but there was no way I could sit and eat after last night. I can't, sir. Please, allow me to apologize for getting drunk in your office. That behavior is so unacceptable. It didn't look like you drank that much. Did you eat at all yesterday? I know you didn't have your usual bagel before our meeting. You were too busy gathering up what we needed and coordinating with the other departments. No, I hadn't. I'd skipped breakfast, and then the thing with Mom had happened, keeping me busy through the afternoon and into the early evening. Then, after the call with my brother's doctor, my stomach had soured on the idea of food. I'd only wanted something to forget about my life. That's what I thought. Sebastian read my expression like the genius he was, and his expression grew grim for the first time since stepping into the bedroom. You can't go on like that. I'm not letting you do another thing until I see you eat something. But, sir, I pressed harder, trying desperately to get my apology and resignation out past the tightness in my throat. Why did he have to make this so hard by being so nice? Sebastian ambled across the room and put his hand on my tense shoulder. Byron, stop. I'm not letting you apologize, and if you've got it in your head to quit, you give up that notion too. Yesterday you had a terrible day, and because of that, you tried to numb some of the pain you were in. The only thing I want you to do is reassure me you won't hurt your body like that again. You need to take better care of yourself. My mouth uselessly flopped open and closed for several seconds as my brain tried to catch up with what was happening. How could he just shrug this off? He'd caught me drunk in his office. I'd hung all over him, babbling like a fucking idiot. That had happened, hadn't it? But didn't I swallowed hard and dropped my voice to a whisper. Didn't I kiss you? Sebastian's handsome face morphed from one of worry to a devilish expression of pure glee. So you remember that? Oh, God, I groaned, covering my face with my hands. It really had happened. Sir, I need to leave. Where are my clothes? My words were muffled as I continued to hide behind my hands. Getting out of here was the only thing that was going to save me from dying on the spot from embarrassment. Your clothes. I had to send your suit out for dry cleaning. I lowered my hands and narrowed my gaze at him. Because I spilled alcohol on my clothes? Sebastian remained silent as he winced. Horror slammed down on my head. I got sick? Sebastian's expression didn't change. Did I get sick on you? Sebastian's wince grew and his head ducked to his shoulders. A loud, gut-twisting moan left me. My knees gave out and I sank to the floor and curled up into a ball like a tiny gray pill bug. Not only had I gotten drunk in my boss's office and kissed him, but to top it all off, I'd puked on him as well. Byron, Sebastian said, and I swore I could hear laughter in his voice. Just leave me here to die, I groaned into the thick, cream-colored carpet. One bad day and I've committed career suicide. Byron. Now he was definitely laughing. It didn't happen in the office, if that helps. I think the car ride upset your stomach. Most of it hit the lawn, and a little got on my shoes. Don't laugh at me, just let me die here. You can toss my corpse out with the trash, go eat my eggs, so your chef's cooking doesn't go to waste. Sebastian was still chuckling as he grabbed my biceps and helped me to my feet. You're not allowed to die. You had a very bad day, but you're not allowed to die. I need you far too much to allow that to happen. How are you not firing me? I cried, even as he ushered me to the table. I have a lot of reasons for not firing you, but the only one that matters right now is that we've all had fucked up days. Do you think I've never had a bad day and done stupid things? I'd be a real asshole for not letting you have one. He gave me a last nudge, and I sat in the cushy swivel seat in front of the delicious meal that had been prepared for me. To my left, I could stare out the window at the sparkling lake and the bright blue sky decorated with thin wisps of clouds. My choices were to stare at the view or at my food, because I couldn't yet meet Sebastian's gaze as he sat across from me. I am sorry, sir. Yesterday I hit a personal wall of sorts and just broke a little. I admitted, as much as it killed me to do so. If anything, I owed him that much for my deplorable and unprofessional behavior. Okay, I accept, but that's the last one. No more apologies after that. Sebastian agreed, and it felt like some of the weight trying to crush my chest eased. Now, do you think you could at least eat something? Despite having enough embarrassment to choke an elephant, I was still starving. Since sitting at the table, a steady stream of delicious scents had been assaulting my nose, teasing my stomach into singing a full, growling chorus of pleas. I grabbed the water and downed half of it to get the paste taste out of my mouth. I removed the cover to see the fluffiest scrambled eggs in existence, golden brown toast, bacon, sausage, and hash browns. There was also a small bowl of oatmeal and another bowl of fruit. A whimper escaped me. Sebastian snagged the cover from my frozen fingers and set it next to him on the floor. Eat. We can chat. My shoulders slumped, and Sebastian laughed in response. I don't mean anything serious or heavy. Eat. Eat. Well, if I was going to die of embarrassment, I might as well do it with a full stomach. I picked up my fork and stabbed some of the eggs that appeared so enticing. Of course, Sebastian was right, and they were the best eggs I'd ever eaten. I worked my way around the tray, struggling to eat at a slow pace when I wanted to inhale everything in front of me. Sebastian was kind enough to wait a couple of minutes, staring out the window, watching the birds fly across the sky and the trees sway in the breeze, prior to speaking again. If you need time off to deal with personal or family matters, we can move things and make it happen. It's not a problem. With food in my painfully empty stomach at last, I could feel common sense leaking into my brain. I shook my head and dared to lift my eyes up to Sebastian's face. Naturally, the man looked as handsome as ever in the morning light. The only difference from our usual everyday meetings was that his collared shirt was missing a tie. The top two buttons were undone, revealing an enticing expanse of throat. Why did this man always have to be so sexy? I was just a poor, weak human who couldn't withstand the awesome power of his beautiful smile and broad shoulders. No, sir, time off is unnecessary. I settled things yesterday. There won't be any more disruptions. But my words only pulled his mouth into a frown. He let out a soft sigh and pushed to his feet. Okay. Promise me that if you have another bad day like yesterday, or if you need a break, you will tell me. I will, sir, I promise. His concern made sense. If I were making myself sick with work and my crappy personal life, I couldn't keep up with my daily tasks, and he'd have to replace me. Sebastian Cortland was an incredibly busy man, and he needed someone who could keep up with him. He still didn't seem happy, but he nodded and walked across the room. I thought he was leaving me alone to finish my breakfast, but He moved to the far bureau and picked up what appeared to be a random knickknack from a bowl. "Did I ever tell you that I met Declan Foster in high school?" Sebastian asked, rather out of the blue. "No, sir." He grunted and strolled to the table. "Yeah, he was a hard nut to crack. Very reserved. Didn't show many emotions. Didn't like to talk. Took me forever to get him to open up." His description of the company's CFO sounded spot on for the man I knew today. Declan Foster was polite and courteous, but he always spoke in an even tone, never showing any emotion. He also never said more than absolutely necessary. Small talk was not something he ever engaged in. But if anyone could get him to open up, I believed Sebastian could do it. Anyway, we've been close for years. He chose to go to the same colleges as me because he didn't want the trouble of needing to break in a new friend. My lips twitched, and I shoved a piece of sausage into my mouth to keep from smiling. I was more inclined to believe the reverse of that. After he joined the company and I became the CEO, he stopped treating me as his friend, even as he was sitting in my house drinking my scotch. He kept treating me as his boss. I hated it. The whole thing put us both on edge. One night, I stood up and I went searching around the lounge until I found this metal ruler that had been left out for some random reason or another, and I held it up to him. I said, "We're friends, and you need to remember that. If you need help with that, I'm giving you this." I shook the ruler in his face and announced, "This is our friend stick. When I'm holding this stick, you have to treat me like your friend and not like your boss." Sebastian dropped into his abandoned chair and held up what turned out to be a shiny gray marble egg. After a lengthy pause, Sebastian continued in a softer, gentler voice. "Byron, I would like to be your friend. You're a smart, funny, interesting guy, and if you need it, I can make this our friend egg to help you remember you can talk to me as a friend, rather than as your boss." Seconds ticked by, and I couldn't tear my eyes from that marble egg. My heart was pounding. Blood roared like a torrent past my ears. Was this real? How could Sebastian want to be my friend? This was insane. I was dreaming. No, I was dead. I'd died of alcohol poisoning, and now I'd gone to this weird heaven where things didn't quite make sense, but were better than my reality. "Can we be friends?" Sebastian asked. "Sir." Sebastian held up one finger from the egg. "My friends don't call me sir. Sebastian, Cor, or even Cortland are pretty common. You called me Bastion last night, so that might be my new favorite." I dropped my fork with a noisy clatter and sat there roasting in the fires spreading from the tips of my ears to my chest. "I don't know," I mumbled. After sucking in a deep breath, I forcefully lowered my walls a bit and blurted out, "I've already made such an ass of myself. I don't even have friends who've seen me that drunk. However, the boss I greatly respect and admire has not only had to suffer through me kissing him, but I also managed to puke on him. Right now, all I want to do is curl up in bed and pretend I don't have to deal with my life for a little while. Maybe pretend you don't think I'm a complete idiot and a loser." "Byron, you are not an idiot or a loser. People have bad days and make bad decisions. Let yourself be human. Besides, do you think me and my friends haven't gotten rip-roaring drunk and done stupid things?" Sebastian snorted, still grinning at me. "So much stupid you'd think we were brain dead." The smile started slowly, pushing against the restraint I always locked on my mouth when I was with Sebastian. I didn't let myself smile because I'd told myself showing too much emotion was unprofessional. He needed me reserved, competent, and efficient at all times. Smiling meant I was getting too relaxed. But he was asking me to be his friend, so smiling would be allowed. Also, I might have liked the idea of having the freedom to be a bit more relaxed around him. "Okay," I agreed, shoving the word out with more force than necessary. Sebastian's grin spread wide across his face and glowed in his eyes. "Okay, what?" I narrowed my eyes at him. He wanted me to use his first name. "No, I can't do that. Not yet. If we were going to be friends, I was going to draw some boundaries up early." Sebastian's smile never wavered. Fair enough. But keep the egg on the table. It'll probably help. A laugh jumped from him, and the grin I had been holding back broke free. I returned my eyes to the remains of my breakfast while he lounged across from me. "So what do you normally do on the weekend?" Sebastian inquired as he plucked a grape from my bowl of fruit and popped it into his mouth. "Nothing exciting. Laundry, read books. Sometimes I'll go for a walk or pick up a few groceries for the week." I huffed a soft laugh. "You're going to discover that I'm the most boring friend you have." Doubtful. Sebastian grabbed another grape and ate it. "I think Declan is still going to claim that title. He likes to organize and reorganize things. He'll alphabetize his books on Saturday, and the next Saturday he'll reorganize them according to genre. After that, color, and then alphabetize them again, but this time by the second letter of the author's last name." He went for my last strawberry, and I batted his hand away. "Nope, those are my favorite." Sebastian chuckled and snagged a piece of melon instead. "Got it." There was something about his lingering look that made me think he'd filed that bit of information away for later. We hadn't discussed the kiss yet, and I wasn't brave enough to tackle that subject. However, he hadn't acted horrified, so I figured we were brushing it under the rug. "How about I treat you to a relaxing day?" Sebastian announced. "A relaxing day with my I stopped myself at the last moment, but Sebastian knew what I was going to say. He lifted his brows at me and smirked. "New friend," I corrected with a tight smile. "Yep, I know the things we should do. Have you ever been up to Chester's?" My eyes widened like a kid on Christmas. I'd heard of Chester's. It was one of the biggest bookstores in the area. Located north of downtown in Westchester, Chester's was a 2-story bookstore with exposed red brick, ironworks, acres of books, and a coffee shop that had a wide selection of coffees, teas, and snacks. I'd been wanting to go for months, but had never found the time or scratched together enough money to treat myself. But an afternoon wandering around a quiet bookstore sounded like heaven. Not to mention, browsing for books meant there was no pressure to make small talk. Silence was encouraged. I've never been to Chester's. I would love to go. The look of pure joy that filled Sebastian's face threatened to stop my heart. Being friends with my boss was going to be very dangerous. Chapter 5. Sebastian Cortland. A bookstore. I was taking him to a bookstore. I was worth billions, and I was taking the guy who'd stolen my heart with all his tiny grins and hidden smirks to a freaking bookstore. Now, to be fair, it was an amazing bookstore, but I wanted to sweep Byron away on my private jet to Paris, where we'd wander the streets, munch on pastries, and cuddle together at the top of the Eiffel Tower. I wanted to take him to Venice, where we'd lazily glide down the canals in a private boat and eat pounds of pasta by candlelight. I wanted to be the one who showed Byron the world and indulge his every fantasy. And no, I wasn't about to break into a Disney song. However, this wasn't a date, I bitterly reminded myself. This was 2 new friends hanging out at a bookstore on a lazy Saturday afternoon. It had seemed like a good idea when I'd initially proposed it. Byron had lit up like a Christmas tree, and I thought I'd scored a brilliant coup. Until we walked into the place, and I realized I couldn't hover at his elbow the entire time while we perused books. Normal people went off in different directions to follow their own unique interests. Except my only interest right now was Byron Graham. My clenched teeth hidden behind a closed-lipped smile, I dragged my sorry ass off to new releases while Byron wandered wide-eyed toward nonfiction. Chester's was a magical store, and I was glad to make it our first non-date outing. The delicious scent of coffee, chocolate, and yeast drifted through the air, accompanied by soft music and even softer conversation. People milled through the various aisles of books. The first floor specialized in nonfiction, calendars, periodicals, and children's books, while the second floor overflowed with the glories of fiction. When I was here alone, I would normally make a pass through nonfiction to see if there were any new biographies or business tomes I needed to pick up, but most of my visit was spent in equal amounts of time in general fiction, fantasy, and romance. But I didn't want to go upstairs while Byron was on the first floor, so I gave in to stalking while texting my friends for help. Rome. Fuck, you're a disaster. Pierce. If he catches you, there's no way you're smoothing it over. You're going to blow it before you get the chance to fuck him. Rome. Totally. Declan. Can you pick up the new Stephen King for me while you're there? Me. Yes, D, and you're all useless. What do I say to get him to relax more around me? Rome. You don't fucking follow him in a bookstore? Pierce. That. Declan. Dating your assistant is dangerous. Rome. They're not dating. Pierce. They're just friends. Rome. With a little light stalking. Pierce. So harmless, so reassuring, not threatening at all. I rolled my eyes and turned away from my phone for a second. Even without them in the store, I could hear the two hyenas howling with laughter at my dilemma. When I spotted Byron moving away from the bargain bookshelves to the business section, I turned my attention to my phone. Me. I hate you both. Rome. You love us because we're all that remains of your common sense. Declan. You're doomed. A snort jumped out of me. It wasn't often that Declan sneaked in a burn on Pierce and Rome. That was a good one, too. Me. What should I do? Pierce. Go upstairs and look at the fantasy books, just like you do every damn time you're in the store. You want him to feel safe and relax? Give him space. Deep down, I knew Pierce was right, but I didn't want him to be right. I might want to wrap myself around Byron, cover us in a blanket, and listen to him tell me all his problems, dreams, and hopes, but we were so far off from that day. Besides, he'd clearly had a shit day on Friday, and the best thing I could do was give him some space to breathe and get his bearings. Me. Fine. Pierce. I don't believe you. Send a pic of the fantasy aisle as soon as you get there. With an irritated grunt, I headed to the escalator, leaving Byron on the first floor. This was what I got for taking Pierce along on my trips to the bookstore. The man knew my reading habits. The moment I reached the second floor, I snapped a quick picture of the great expanse, knowing Pierce would recognize it, and sent it to the group. Afterward, I tucked my phone away and let myself get lost in books. It might have taken a little while, but I forgot about my crush on the first floor. I didn't know how much time passed before I caught sight of slacks and a familiar shiny shoe in my peripheral vision. My head snapped up, and I found Byron standing over me wearing borrowed clothes. Sadly, he was too small to fit in my clothes, and he'd had to settle for a pair of slacks and a dark blue collared shirt Rome had forgotten at my house. I was beginning to think someone had kidnapped you, Byron teased. Huh? My brain had stopped. I was incapable of thought. Byron was smiling at me. In fact, all the lines of tension that had pulled his lips tight, furrowed his brow, and surrounded his eyes were now gone. He appeared so much better than he had this morning. Space, combined with quiet and books, was a wonderful thing. I've been searching everywhere for you. I didn't expect to see you sitting in the middle of the fantasy aisle with a stack of books. Oh, yeah, kind of got lost in these. I shoved to my feet with only a soft groan from stiff muscles and creaking knees. I picked up my stack of books and paused when I saw just one book tucked under his arm. Are you done, or are you still looking? I'm done. I'm good. Byron answered quickly, hugging the book to his chest. You sure? Because I'm happy to find a chair and read for another hour. Nah, I'm good. Do you read only nonfiction? I inquired as I led the way to the first floor and the checkout counter. Mostly. I used to read fantasy, but I haven't in years. I'm so behind on all my favorite authors. Well, if you ever want to start again, you can always raid my library. I've been collecting since high school, and my collection has gotten out of control. Thanks. I bit my tongue to hold in my babbling. It was a good thing the line was short, and the young woman ringing me up wanted to chat as she worked, giving me a chance to recover my self-control and collect my thoughts. As it was, I had to use all the self-control I'd gathered to keep myself from offering to buy his book. Byron was a self-sufficient, independent man. He didn't need a sugar daddy buying all his things, even though I wanted to be that sugar daddy with every fiber of my fucking being. As we stepped outside, my stomach growled. "Lunch!" I shouted, and then inwardly cursed myself. That was supposed to be the silent part. You hungry? It's... shit. I glanced at my watch to find that we'd lost hours in that store. How about a late lunch before I take you home? Byron opened his mouth, looking as if he were planning to turn me down, but his expression shifted at the last second, and he nodded. Okay, that sounds nice. Great. I know this place not far from here. My treat. And to my even greater shock, Byron didn't argue. We climbed into my two-seat convertible Jag, the one thing I could use to show off a bit and treat Byron since I wasn't allowed to stick him on a private jet at this very early stage of things. In less than 20 minutes, we'd zipped across town to this restaurant that was always crowded because the dining room was so tiny. However, since I was a key investor, Lisa and Ray always had a table waiting for me. Amid lots of hugs and excited greetings, we were shown to a secluded table on the back patio that overlooked a pond where the dragonflies zipped through the air and a couple of weeping willows dipped branches into the water. There was a steady buzz of conversation from the other diners, but out here the noise dropped to a dull murmur. "Of course you can get right into the dragonfly's wing," Byron murmured with a smile after the server left us with water and menus. Well, I did give them a good chunk of startup cash, and I try to eat here at least twice a month. Their T-bone is amazing, and on Sunday they have the best prime rib in the city. Byron's smile grew even wider. They also have one of the longest wait lists to get a reservation in the city. Then you'll have to return with me for another meal. My companion said nothing. He just dipped his head behind his menu, directing his attention to finding food. Our conversation meandered as we talked about food preferences and my deep, abiding hatred for anything to do with a sweet potato in all its forms. By the time the server returned and took our orders, we were relaxed once again. A comfortable silence settled between us, and I had a moment to admire his profile as he stared out at the lake. Sometimes we felt like old friends. I'd known Byron for 3 years. We'd interacted 5 days a week, with few exceptions. Even when one of us took vacation time, we found a reason to sneak into each other's texts or emails. Going more than a weekend without talking to Byron felt wrong. Ronnie would have loved this place, Byron said suddenly, in a voice so soft I almost didn't hear him. Ronnie? An ex? Byron gave his head a shake. My older brother. He loved to fish. Got out on a lake or pond or river any chance he could. My heart squeezed for Byron, and I fought the urge to reach across the table to cover his hand with mine. When did he pass away? Byron's head snapped around, and he blinked at me for a second, as if he were waking from a trance. Oh, sorry. God, I'm an ass. Ronnie didn't die. There was a slight redness to the tips of his ears as he gazed at the lake. Ronnie was involved in a car accident when he was 17, and he suffered severe brain damage as a result. He struggles with memory, speech, and has extremely violent outbursts. There's only 3 years difference between us, but he's stuck with the mind of a child and the body of an adult. There must be times where it feels like he died in that accident because he's no longer the brother you remember. Byron grunted in agreement, his eyes still locked on the lake as if he were lost in thought. Would you like to leave? We can find somewhere. No. Byron jerked in his seat, his eyes wide. Absolutely not. I've been dying to eat here. Plus, if Ronnie no longer has the chance to visit a restaurant like this, I can at least do it for him. Byron swallowed hard, and his smile was brittle. He lives in a hospital now, long-term care facility. He doesn't get outside much, but it's an excellent facility, and they take excellent care of him, as best they can. What's wrong? Is there something wrong with the care he's receiving? No, He stopped himself and turned toward me, but he kept his head lowered, his glare directed at his water glass. We're friends, Byron. You can talk to me. Do I need to take out the egg? A half smile curled up one side of his mouth. You do not have that with you. I reached into my pocket, took out the marble egg, and positioned it in front of him, earning me the best surprised laugh. The friend egg says talk, I said. That's not always going to work, he replied as he wiped one corner of his eye. But yesterday, the topper on my already shit day was a call from Ronnie's doctor. They needed to increase and adjust his meds because of a violent outburst. No one was hurt, thankfully, but the doctor reminded me that Ronnie needs to be moved to another facility. The current place can manage, but it's always a strain for them if he has a bad day. Their top answer for problems is to dose him with more drugs, but the doc thinks that this other hospital would help him more because they have more programs that can work with Ronnie. Is the other location full? Can they not take him? Byron shook his head. The other facility is twice as expensive. When he lifted his lips this time, it was frail and bitter as he tossed his hands up. You know healthcare in America, it's always ridiculously expensive. I had to bite on my tongue until I could taste blood to keep from blurting out 100 things I knew were the wrong thing to say. How much do you need? Let me pay for it. How about I give you a giant raise? Before any of that could tumble from my mouth, my eye caught on the marble egg resting between us. We were brand new friends, and throwing money at Byron's problems was more likely to insult him than make him happy. Right now, I was supposed to be listening and offering emotional support. But, it's been almost 2 years since I went digging through all the databases and websites for grants and subsidies to help pay for care like that. There might be new stuff out there that I've overlooked. Byron continued, seemingly oblivious to my struggles. I know some people who are experts in healthcare costs and things like that. I could reach out to them and see if they have any advice or ideas that might help, I offered. That was a lie. I didn't know anyone who was an expert in that tangled mess, but I had lawyers and other teams at my disposal who could wade through that morass and find answers for me and Byron. If I couldn't give Byron my money, I could at least secretly spend it on him to help him find the answers he needed. Really? That would be amazing. Byron stared at me with wide, shining eyes. The relief rising off the younger man was a palpable thing. I hadn't offered a dime to him, but Byron acted as if I'd taken out an entire army of worries for him and given him his very first taste of hope in years. Trudging through all those websites and forums can be so soul-sucking at times, and finding anyone who knows this world and has the time to help is just as hard. Don't worry about it. I'll make some phone calls on Monday, get some wheels turning for you. I promise. We'll find some answers. Yes, I was going to move this mountain for Byron, and it was only the start. Chapter 6. Sebastian Cortland. Yesterday was an amazing day. Books and a late lunch at a great restaurant. By the time we'd walked back to the car, Byron had been laughing and even cracking jokes. I hadn't wanted it to end, but I'd known better than to press my luck. I'd dropped him off at his apartment after lunch. So naturally, I was on his doorstep early Sunday morning with a bag of his favorite bagels and cream cheese. What are you doing here? Byron demanded as soon as he opened the door. Today, he wore a pair of old gray sweatpants that hung so deliciously low on his hips and a baggy t-shirt from the local Labor Day fireworks celebration, except the t-shirt was about 8 years old and had a hole at the shoulder seam. But the best part, he was wearing glasses. Thin, gold, wire-rimmed glasses that made his eyes appear even bigger. He never wore them to the office. I had no idea he needed them. You wear glasses? The words popped out of my mouth before I could stop them. I was lucky I had any filter at all when he was looking so relaxed and adorable. The entire picture made me want to pick him up, carry him to the nearest bed, and cuddle him while stripping off all the worn, slouchy clothes. I haven't bothered to put in my contacts yet. Why are you here? I brought bagels and your suit, I said, shoving both things toward him. I had debated holding on to his suit and giving it to him in the office, but if someone saw me do that, it would raise questions. Even if no one saw me, it was likely to put Byron in a panic, and that wasn't what I wanted at all. Oh. Byron took the suit and frowned at the bag of bagels as he continued to stand in the doorway, blocking my entrance. In fact, he had the door pulled against his body, keeping me from seeing into his apartment. Was there someone with him he didn't want me to see? Fuck. Was he seeing someone? As the thought dug its claws in my brain, I could hardly breathe. He'd never said whether he was dating someone. I'd always assumed he was single based on the ridiculous number of hours he spent at the office. But I could be so fucking wrong. Did I stop by at a bad time? Do you have company? Company? Lines of confusion streaked across his forehead, and his lips dipped into a deep frown, as if the idea of someone being there was utterly foreign to him. No, no one is here. So, you just don't want me to see your place? I may have added an exaggerated pout in my voice, and Byron definitely heard it because he gave me the "you've got to be shitting me" look. I had been on the receiving end of that glare long before he'd agreed to be friends with me. But I couldn't help it. I wanted to see his apartment. I was also worried about him. This was a terrible neighborhood, and the exterior of this building didn't make it appear to be a rare haven within the dangerous cesspool. It was one of the many things that had been on my mind since we parted ways on Saturday. There's been a lot of car thefts and break-ins recently. It's not a good idea to park your car here. Carl drove me. Byron rolled his eyes and sighed as he stepped back so he could motion for me to enter. Try to rein in your enthusiasm. My place isn't as nice as yours. I opened my mouth to say that I didn't expect his apartment to be some ritzy palace, but the words died on my tongue as I stepped inside. It was a shoebox of a studio apartment. The kitchen ran along one wall, and it comprised a 2-burner stove, a sink, and a mini-fridge. He had a futon that was likely his bed and sofa, a folding camping chair, and an overturned cardboard box that served as a table. The only nice things in the entire room were his laptop, which was supplied by the company, and the closet full of suits. I thought I'd been paying Byron well. I couldn't think of the exact number off the top of my head, but I knew it was 6 figures. Why was he living so poorly? Did he feel like he had to spend all his money on suits for work? Maybe I needed to include an extra stipend in his annual paycheck for suits, ties, and shoes. Does your boss not give you raises to keep up with the rising cost of living? I tried to make it sound like a joke, but worry was gnawing deep at my gut. Had I failed him and my other employees this badly? Byron growled as he walked past me to hang the suit in the closet. He does. When he strode past me, going in the opposite direction, he snagged the bag of bagels from my hand and closed the door. But it's like I explained yesterday. Healthcare in America is expensive. My paycheck goes to pay for my brother's medical care. I also support my mother. That last part was added in such a growly, angry tone that I stuck a big red flag in the topic of Byron's mother. Do not ask about his mother. Do not poke. I watched as Byron put the bag of bagels on the counter, then grabbed a cutting board to lie across the sink, expanding his counter space. He pulled out the small tubs of cream cheese and the plastic knives they'd tossed inside. Are you going to have one too? He inquired. Well, I think I will stay for breakfast, since you asked so nicely. Byron snagged one of the plastic knives and pointed the tip at me. Fine, but no more questions about my apartment or money. Of course. Did you start reading your book yet? I inquired, to prove that I'd forgotten about his living situation. I hadn't, not in the slightest, but poking at Byron's tender spots would not soften him toward me. No, not yet. I slept and caught up on emails last night. You? Finished one, trying to decide what to read next, I replied as I selected a cinnamon swirl bagel. Byron peered into the bag before turning his sharp gaze on me, the anger on his face replaced by a look of wonder and surprise. You got all my favorites. How did you even know? What? It's not weird that I noticed which are your favorites. You've been eating bagels with me for 3 years. I bet you know my favorites. Everything bagel if you don't have early morning meetings and can brush your teeth. Cinnamon swirl is your second favorite, Byron answered. Yes, but I order your food most days. I'm supposed to know. You like the raisin cinnamon swirl, but your favorite is the chocolate chip paired with the strawberry cream cheese. You also like the orange cranberry one, but I think you tend to forget it exists because you can only get it at the store several blocks from the office. Byron looked away from me, but I could still see the blush staining his cheekbone as he focused on spreading strawberry cream cheese on his chocolate chip bagel. "You're crazy," he grumbled. I smirked as I fixed my bagel. When we were both done, Byron snagged 2 bottles of water from his fridge, and we carried our breakfast to his living room. He dropped onto his futon with the lumpy black cushion, and I sat in the camping chair that creaked under my weight. "So, I was thinking," I began after we'd eaten in silence for a couple of minutes. "This scares me," Byron muttered between bites, but there was a ghost of a smile on his lips. "You should have dinner with me, as a date." Byron sucked in a breath and started coughing as he choked on the chunk of bread in his throat. I dropped my bagel on the box table and snatched up his bottle of water. Wonderful, just wonderful. I'd asked him out on a date and killed him. I cracked the plastic seal and unscrewed the lid. As soon as it was opened, I handed it over and pounded him on the back. Within a minute, the coughing lessened enough for him to take a drink and drag in a few ragged gasps of air. I traded thumping for rubbing. To help him. It was totally to help him and had nothing to do with me wanting to touch him. "Are you crazy?" Byron demanded in a rough voice when he could speak. "Of course I'm not going to date you. You're my boss. It's expressly forbidden in the employee handbook. If anyone found out, I'd lose my job." Okay, that was the answer I'd expected. I was prepared for this. "Sure, but what if I wasn't your boss?" "Huh?" I leaned forward, my forearms resting on my knees. "What if I was some guy who'd walked up to you at Chester's yesterday and flirted with you? Would you join me for coffee?" Byron glared for a second before shaking his head and chuckling. "You're crazy. Nobody does that." I would have. "What would you have said if I weren't your boss?" I'd expected him to keep his face lowered in embarrassment, but that little minx looked me straight in the face with a smirk tilting one corner of his mouth higher. "I don't know. Depends on how cheesy the flirting was. Top notch. You're worthy of only my grade A best flirting." Byron looked at me for a heartbeat, then broke our stare to make a soft noise like a giggle. I probably would have agreed. His wide eyes jumped up to my face. "To coffee, just coffee. But this is all nonsense because you are my boss and dating isn't permitted. The risk is too big." Oh, that last sentence. Did he even know how dangerous that sentence was? In our world, risks are taken every day if there's a big enough potential reward to help mitigate those risks. It's not only about the risk-reward ratio. You have to take into account the person considering the particular move. For instance, you're an aggressive risk taker. You'll take bigger risks, not because of the rewards, but because you have a larger protective cushion than most people. I grinned at Byron, resting my chin on my hand. Was it wrong that I got so turned on by the man's big analytical brain? "Go ahead, say it. I'm rich." Byron didn't say it, but he did roll his eyes at me. "Whereas I am not much of a risk taker because my protective cushion, should things go disastrously wrong for me, is non-existent." "So what you're saying is that the potential reward has to be life-changing." "Oh, yeah," he muttered as he picked up his bagel. There was no planning it better than this. All the pieces were falling into place. This idea had been spinning in my head for most of yesterday and had kept me up well into the night. A door had opened in life to let me have a shot at this amazing man, and there was no way in hell I wasn't going to take it. "I have a unique bargain that I'm willing to strike with you." "I shouldn't even be listening to this," he grumbled before taking a bite of his bagel. Mine lay forgotten on the box table. My stomach was tying and untying itself in knots of excitement and nerves. The solution to getting him to agree to a dating trial had solidified late last night as I'd replayed our conversation at the restaurant in my head. Either he was going to consider it, or he was going to be so insulted that he'd throw me out and start searching for another job. This time, I waited until he'd finished chewing and had swallowed his bagel. Go on 10 dates with me in exchange for 10 years of your brother's care. What? 10 dates. For each date, I'll pay for 1 year of your brother's care in the new facility that he needs to move to. I'll pay for all of it. Everything related to your brother Ronnie. Let's say $250,000 a year to cover it all. Byron's mouth opened and closed several times as he stared at me. At last, he shut his mouth and shot to his feet. He paced his apartment, but there wasn't a lot of space for him to move. It didn't seem to bother him as he shoved both hands into his messy hair. You've lost your mind. I haven't. I like you. Yeah, I've kind of picked up on that. His voice was a little high-pitched and incredulous as he spoke. I hope you'll consider it. This is life-changing money, right? It will give you some much-needed breathing room, the chance to build your cushion. You're still young. It will give you a chance to enjoy your life. There was a lot more I wanted to say about how he could take care of himself better, but I didn't want to piss him off. Besides, I wanted the job of caring for him. I know. Trust me, I know what kind of difference it would make. Do you understand how much money we're talking? 10 dates at an agreed sum of $250,000 per date. That comes out to $2.5 million, I answered calmly, but it did not help to calm Byron in the slightest. A lot, a fucking lot. No, I can't. Absolutely not. Why? Byron stopped his pacing and stared at me as though I'd started speaking a foreign language. Because I'm not worth that kind of money. Not just for 10 dates. You are to me. Byron grunted, but didn't look happy about it. I pushed out of my seat and walked to him. With infinite care, I extracted his fingers from his hair and put my hands on his shoulders. I squeezed the tense muscles there, trying to get him to relax before he gave himself a heart attack. Why are you doing this? He whispered. Because I want to get to know you better. That's why people date. I thought that was why you wanted to be friends. My face wrinkled up in a wince. Yeah, but I want to flirt with you, and I don't flirt with my friends. Also, hold your hand, if you'll let me. I released his shoulders and took a step back. But this bargain does not include the expectation of any kind of physical intimacy at all. You don't have to hold my hand or kiss me or anything if you don't want to. That was going to be the hard part. I was drawn to him, ached to touch him in 100 tiny ways. If I were to go out on dates with him, I'd want to hold his hand, cuddle him, kiss him until our lips were sore. But I'd have to behave. What if we go out on 2 dates and discover that this whole thing was a bad idea? That we're horrible as a couple? My heart skipped around my chest. The fact that he was looking for a hole in my bargain meant he was at least considering it. This was an excellent sign. Then I'll pay for 2 years of Ronnie's care. What if, after 10 dates, I don't want to date you ever again? Won't you think I used you for the money? His question only made me smile wider. He sounded so insulted and outraged at just saying the question. No, I trust you. You have integrity. You would never use someone like that. Byron scoffed and paced away from me, but his movements were slower and more thoughtful, as if he were still searching for loopholes and problems. God, I loved his brain. It was the sexiest thing about him after his mouth and chin, and his dexterous, slender fingers. Never mind. All of him was sexy, especially his brain. If we don't want to continue dating after the agreed-upon 10 dates, we part as friends. No harm, no foul. No one has any hold on the other person. I pay for the 10 years. What if... Byron looked at me from the corner of his eye, and I swore the tip of his ear got redder. What? I prodded. Byron hesitated, chewing on his bottom lip. What if we wanted to keep dating after those 10? If someone were to find out, I'd lose my job. I don't know about you, but I like my job. I need my job. People finding out we're dating would ruin my reputation. That would be the risk in the beginning. But if we want to keep dating, I could swap you with another executive assistant. He stared at me for a second. You're shitting me. I shook my head. I reached for his hand to pull him close, but I stopped myself, letting my hand fall to my side. Declan is constantly in need of help. He scares them all away, but you've handled him countless times without a single problem. He's made offers for you several times. I've shut him down because I couldn't stand the idea of losing you. But if I were dating you, I'd have you as my boyfriend, and I could sacrifice not having you as my assistant during the day. Because I would have him every night and weekend. That was the part I was smart enough to not say out loud. This time he didn't seem to notice as he paced. This had to be overwhelming for him. It was a lot to take in. My idea was insane, but after having a crush on his cute ass for so long, I didn't want to lose this opportunity to draw him closer. The best part was that not only would I get to date him, but I'd get the chance to help him with his financial problems. It's okay to say yes for the money, I stated in a low voice. He swung to face me, a look of horror on his face twisting up his handsome features. Sebastian, absolutely not. You're not some walking piggy bank for other people to take advantage of. Yeah, there was no way I was letting this man go. Say yes because you're attracted to me. That at least got the horror to disappear. Whatever. Who isn't attracted to you? He muttered as he glared. I don't understand why you want this. Talking wouldn't settle this. I took 2 strides to close the distance between us. He didn't have a chance to retreat. I wrapped one arm around his waist while I cupped his cheek with my other hand, tilting his face up toward me. He gasped as my mouth descended onto his in a blistering kiss. It was hard and brutal, all take and no give. Mentally, I prepared myself for him to push me away, maybe even kick me square in the balls. For a couple of heartbeats, he was frozen, his body stiff and unyielding. A shudder ran through him like the great cracking of a glacier before it fell into the ocean. In the next instant, he was wrapping his arms behind my neck, pressing even closer as he returned the kiss with the same heat and desperate need. My tongue plunged into his mouth, tangling with his as I tasted his sweetness. He moaned, and I was lost. I started blindly walking, pushing him back until he hit something with a dull thud. My gaze flicked up enough to see he was pinned against the door. Perfect. Byron seemed to think so as well, because he leaned on it while tightening his arms, pulling me in even closer. The arm I had on his waist slipped lower, and my wandering hand located what felt like the most perfect ass in all the world. I groaned into his mouth as I lifted him higher. Wave after wave of melting heat blazed through me, while all his soft whimpers and growls reduced my self-control to dust. And those gray sweatpants? Thank God, and whoever invented gray sweatpants, because I could now feel his hard cock pressed right into my hip. I wanted to bend Byron over and fuck him so hard. I wanted to fuck him pinned to the door, then on his hands and knees in the middle of this tiny apartment. Then I wanted him to ride me on his futon. After we covered every inch of this place, I wanted to take him home with me and fuck him in every room of my mansion. Never had I wanted anyone as badly as I wanted him. Which was why it was so painful to end that damn kiss. I dragged my mouth away from his, kissing up his jaw to feather one last light kiss to his temple. That's why I want this. I want to kiss you and fuck you. But I also want to spend time with you, to date you and discover all the things that make you happy, like strawberries and good books. I want to know if we can be happy together. Yes, I'd kind of immediately broken my own rule about not pressuring him with physical intimacy, but I didn't want him believing the differences between us were insurmountable. There were plenty of things that were so right, starting with the heat I just knew was bubbling under the surface. Fuck. Byron dropped his forehead to rest on my shoulder, his chest heaving as he sucked in great gulps of air. That's not fair. There's no blood in my brain right now. I can't think. Think about it for the rest of today, and give me an answer on Monday. He nodded against me before lifting his head up. Okay, tomorrow. I dove in for one last kiss, just in case I never had a chance to do it again. I didn't know if he had the same thought, but Byron was right there, lighting me up like he wanted to drive me insane. The man had a wicked tongue and knew how to use it. I kept the kiss short because I was nearing my breaking point. When I stepped away, a tiny sound left him, and I almost cracked. He stared at me with the hungriest eyes I'd ever seen. There was no way he could deny it. The heat and hunger were right there for us to see. The question was whether all the other pieces of who we were could fit together. With a lopsided grin, I reached down and adjusted myself, trying to find a comfortable position now that he had me painfully hard. Byron snorted and pulled on his shirt as he stepped away from the door. The attempt to hide the erection tenting his sweats failed miserably. Tomorrow, I gritted out as I slipped out the door. This was going to be the longest 24 hours of my life. Chapter 7. Byron Graham. I had never been so happy to be at work in all my life. The office represented a predictable routine, even when Sebastian was in one of his unpredictable moods and wanted to shake things up. My morning began with coffee and emails. By the time I finished my coffee, Kalen would be arriving. He would bring some pleasant chit-chat and an eagerness to dive into the day that matched my own. As soon as we had our schedule worked out, Sebastian would arrive. At that point, I'd give him a rundown of his first meetings of the day, calls that needed to be made, and reports that needed his attention. From there, he would either roll with things or completely blow all our plans out of the water. Routine was what I needed after spending Sunday alternating between denial and panic. Of course, that didn't include the time I needed to jerk off because my insane boss had left me with such a state of blue balls that I couldn't remember my goddamn name. So yeah, Sunday was jerking off, panic, anger, temptation, more jerking off, followed by more panic. What was I supposed to say to him? Putting aside the fact that it was billboard on the side of the road obvious that I was attracted to him, could I really date him? Even though he'd said it was okay that I accept the bargain simply for the money, wouldn't that always be in the back of his mind? Would he ever believe me if I professed to care for him? Who would turn down that kind of life-changing money? I might have integrity, but I wasn't stupid. It wasn't just a better life for me, but it would improve things for Ronnie and my mom. The money I would have been spending on Ronnie could be used to get my mom better help. She could finally break free of her alcoholism and live a happier life. Maybe even get a new job, or at least volunteer. Something that made her happier than sitting around the house doing nothing other than watching TV and getting drunk. But what would happen after the 10 years were up? How would I pay for Ronnie's new facility and my mom's assistance? Well, if I were still with Sebastian... No, I would not think like that. Sebastian was not my personal fix-it-all. I could do this on my own. 10 years was plenty of time to make improvements in my life so I could afford Ronnie's new facility and my mom's improved support system. Was I truly considering this? I was. God help me, I was. If I were honest with myself, it wasn't only about the money. Sebastian was right. If he wasn't my boss and he had hit on me in the bookstore, I would have been on him in an instant. But if I did this, no one could ever find out. My reputation would be ruined. People in the business world gossiped. Even after I found a new job, people would find out that I'd fucked the boss. Plus, I loved working for Cortland Enterprises. I didn't want to leave. The idea of being the CFO's assistant didn't exactly thrill me, but Declan Foster was a good, patient man who worked hard and was dedicated to Cortland Enterprises. I loved being Sebastian's assistant, but if we were dating, I would still get to see him frequently. I jerked my head up at the sudden knock on the doorframe of my office to find Kalen standing in the open doorway, a smile on his lips. Shit, he was here. Good morning. Everything okay? You looked pretty lost in thought, he said. Oh, yes, lost in thought. I wasn't making any sense. Time had flown by me. I'd managed to get only a fraction of my usual work done prior to Kalen's arrival. I hadn't even gotten my coffee yet, or finished compiling my notes for Sebastian's meetings. Shaking off my temporary brain fog, I got up from my desk and followed Kalen to the coffee station in our small break room. The top floor of the Cortland Enterprises building held a luxurious lobby filled with green leafy plants, colorful bouquets that changed with the seasons, and large comfortable sofas and chairs around coffee tables. At the end nearest the elevators was a large conference room that seated 25 people comfortably, and 2 huge flat-screen TVs on the walls for presentations and web conferencing. At the opposite end, after you walked through the lobby seating, you'd reach Kalen's desk. His job, other than assisting me with various tasks, was to greet anyone who tried to see Sebastian during the day. Even if they had a scheduled meeting or appointment, they had to get through Kalen first. Past Kalen were 2 large offices, one for Sebastian as the CEO, and the other for John Cortland, Sebastian's father and the company's chairman. Just outside of Sebastian's office, there were 2 smaller offices. To the left was mine. It was a modest size, but unlike Kalen's area, I had walls and a door, which allowed me to make private calls without anyone overhearing me. To the right was a partially hidden office for Sebastian's on-duty bodyguard, which was Carl most days. A push of a button could summon him instantly. There was an emergency call switch that alerted him hidden under my desk, Kalen's desk, and Sebastian's. During my time in Sebastian's employ, I'd needed to push it only once, and that was when a former employee had lost his shit after being fired for corporate espionage. It had been an ugly scene, and I prayed I'd never have to push it again. We took turns making coffee at the Keurig machine and doctoring them up with creamer and sugar. "Did you have a good weekend?" I asked, while wondering if adding more caffeine to my anxious jitters was wise. Before he even answered, a broad, dreamy smile spread across Kalen's lips. Obviously, Kalen had spent the weekend with his new boyfriend, Arden. "Yeah, Arden and I drove down to Red River Gorge and rented one of those cabins near the Daniel Boone National Forest. We spent our time hiking and checking out the different arches." "I'm surprised. From your expression, I thought maybe you spent the weekend in bed." "Well," Kalen cleared his throat, his smirk returning. "There was plenty of that, too." Kalen had met Arden through a dating app that Sebastian had signed him up for without his knowledge. It was lucky that Kalen had matched with Arden for Valentine's Day. The two had been together for just over 3 months and were still in the hearts and rainbows phase of their relationship. Was I jealous? Maybe a little. I'd gotten to meet Arden once when he'd popped by one afternoon to take Kalen out to lunch. He was a sweet man who obviously thought Kalen hung the moon, and I was happy for them both. But did I have a shot at some of that same happiness with Sebastian? The idea of dating someone as rich, handsome, and dynamic as Sebastian was mind-boggling. I'd always thought that rich people dated other rich people. They didn't notice people like me, who were scraping by, one bad day away from complete ruin. "What about you?" Kalen inquired, breaking into my wandering thoughts. "Do anything exciting this past weekend?" I lifted my coffee to my lips to take a sip as he asked, and I was grateful I'd stopped, because I would have choked on the hot beverage. "Oh, nothing too exciting, just got ripped in the boss's office, kissed him, puked on him, and then went on a pseudo-date before he proposed this insane bargain that could both fix and destroy my life. Nothing too out of the ordinary." No, not really. Slept a lot, read some. Sounds like a nice, quiet weekend." Kalen's smile was tight and polite. I could almost feel his pity. Yeah, that was a pathetic weekend. Not because it was a total lie, but because it was an answer I'd given more than once. I rarely did anything on the weekends besides sleep, read, and prepare for the coming work week. What he didn't know was that my weekends were usually spent checking on my mother, cleaning her house, getting her groceries, and running to Louisville to see my brother. When it was all over, I was glad to be at work because it was less stressful than my weekends. "We should get to our desks. I'm sure Sebastian will be walking in soon." "Yep," Kalen said with a nod. He strolled out of our break room ahead of me. "He's got a long list of meetings today. It's going to be a busy one. I'll be ready if you need me to jump on something." "Thank you." After my chat with Kalen and a few sips of coffee, my brain was ready to attack the day. I breezed through a stack of emails and sorted through the reports and contracts that were ready to hit Sebastian's desk. Despite nearly everything going digital, he preferred to read all major reports and contracts on paper. He said it was easier to write on the paper when a thought or concern hit him. It was my responsibility to decipher his handwriting and add the notes to the digital copies for the various departments. Sebastian breezed through the office as I was getting the last of my notes together. There was no need for Kalen's warning text that Sebastian had arrived, because I could hear my boss's cheery voice echoing across the entire floor. "Happy Monday, Kalen. You look like you had a great weekend," Sebastian called out. "So do you, sir," Kalen replied. "It was fantastic. Best weekend I've had in a long time." I steeled myself, fighting the urge to bury my face in my hands even as heat crept into my cheeks. There was no way he was talking about me and our time together. He was insane. As the clack of his hard-soled shoes grew louder across the black marble floor, I gathered up the papers and my tablet, which had a list of all the things he needed to review. Just like every day, I rose from my desk and moved to meet him at the door to his office. "There's my Byron, the man I would be utterly lost without," Sebastian greeted with more exuberance than usual. He was a chipper person, but this was taking it to the extreme even for him. Carl walked 2 steps behind him and gave a wordless shrug, as if to say he had no idea what had put him in such a good mood. "Good morning, sir," I greeted, and pushed both of the doors open for him. The first thing I'd done upon returning to Cortland Enterprises this morning was to clean up my paper mess, scrub away all signs that I'd ever had a drop of alcohol in that room, and freshen the air with his favorite scents. While I knew he'd seen the disaster I'd made, I wanted to make sure there was not even a shadow of it for his arrival on Monday. We needed to forget about that embarrassing incident. Carl followed Sebastian in and made a quick check of the office to make sure everything was secure, then retreated to his own space. We wouldn't see him until Sebastian stepped out for lunch. As Sebastian dropped into his high-back leather swivel chair, I took up my usual position on his right. My too handsome boss was dressed in my favorite suit, a dark navy plaid material with a lighter blue collared shirt and tie. There was something about the way the jacket hugged his shoulders that made it so hard to look away from him. Did he know that was my favorite? I wouldn't put it past him to wear it in hopes of swaying my final decision on the bargain he proposed. But how did he know it was my favorite? It was only when I noticed Sebastian had his left elbow resting on the top of his desk and his cheek leaning against his fist as he gazed up at me with a grin that I realized I had been staring instead of talking. "Sir, you have a long list of meetings today.